She got arrested at the airport and he still boarded the plane. Was he heartless or just honest? She is standing at the airport security checkpoint, and the officers are pulling her aside. Her bags are on the belt, the flight is boarding, and the man she has been dating for 6 months is watching all of it unfold in real time. And then he picks up his carry-on and walks toward the gate anyway. That image alone is going to live in your head for a while. Because the question is not really whether he was wrong. The question is what kind of person boards that plane, and whether the answer to that question is someone you would want to be with. Let us go back to the beginning, because this story starts well before the airport. Our guy, 34 years old, has been with his girlfriend for 6 months. Not 6 years. 6 months. They are still in the phase where you are figuring out each other's coffee orders and pretending you do not notice each other's annoying habits, the phase where everything is still a little bit exciting and a little bit unknown and neither of you has really been tested yet. You have not had a real fight. You have not seen each other sick or broke or scared. You are still performing your best version of yourselves, and that is completely normal, because that is what 6 months looks like. And in that context, in that early, optimistic, honeymoon stretch of a relationship, they book a trip together to fly from Detroit to Washington for his cousin's wedding. He books it in April. The trip is in June. Everything is planned, everything is paid for, the hotel is reserved, the flights are confirmed, and they are probably excited about it, probably talking about what they will wear and how it will feel to do something this big together this early. And then in May, 1 month before departure, his girlfriend makes a discovery that changes the entire situation. She finds out she has outstanding warrants. And not just one. Multiple warrants, built up over the past few years. Now, the detail that really raises eyebrows here is that she says she does not remember what the charges are. And look, I am not going to sit here and pretend I know her entire life story. People go through chaotic periods. People lose track of things during dark stretches of their lives. People miss court dates because they are dealing with something bigger, or because they are young and overwhelmed and not thinking clearly about consequences that feel distant and abstract. People let things slip. But warrants you have forgotten about are not exactly a minor administrative oversight. That is the kind of thing that tends to carry some real weight attached to it, the kind of weight that does not quietly disappear on its own just because you stopped thinking about it. So here is where our guy does something reasonable. He expresses concern. He points out, logically and correctly, that showing up to an airport with active warrants is not a plan that tends to end well. Airport security runs your name. That is just how it works, and it is not a slow or forgiving process. It is automated, it is thorough, and it does not care about your travel plans or your cousin's wedding or how excited you were about the hotel. And if something comes up, you are not making your flight. You are making a different kind of trip entirely, and it does not involve first-class seating. He is not wrong to flag this. That is just common sense wrapped in concern, and at this stage, raising the alarm is genuinely the caring thing to do. His girlfriend, to her credit, does not dismiss the concern. She says she will handle it. She has a month, she says, and she will get the warrants resolved before the trip. That is actually a somewhat responsible response. She is not burying her head in the sand. She is not getting defensive or telling him to mind his business. She is acknowledging the problem, looking it in the eye, and committing to fix it before it becomes everyone's problem at a security checkpoint. Whether she actually could fix multiple warrants in under a month is a very different question, because anyone who has spent 5 minutes dealing with the court system knows that things rarely move at the speed you need them to. Continuances get scheduled. Paperwork gets lost. Hearings get pushed. The system is not built for urgency. But the intention was there, and that counts for something. Then she asks him a question that cuts right to the heart of everything. She asks him directly. If I get arrested at the airport, will you still board the plane? And this is the moment where everything crystallizes, where all the polite concern and all the practical planning strips away and what is left is just the raw, uncomfortable truth of who these two people are to each other. And he tells her the truth. Yes. He will still board. Because it is her responsibility as an adult to have her affairs in order, and because they are not married, which means he has not taken on legal or personal obligation for her situation. He says it plainly, and honestly. The fact that he said it out loud instead of dodging the question says something about his character. He is not stringing her along. He is not performing reassurance he does not mean. He is being transparent about where he stands, and she asked, so he answered. Now this is where the internet, as it always does, split right down the middle. Half of the people reading this said he is completely justified. She is an adult with agency and history and choices that she made, and none of those choices involved him. He did not create the warrants. He did not miss the court dates. He is not her parent, her lawyer, or her husband. He is a person who has been in her life for 6 months, and 6 months does not come with a legal or moral obligation to absorb the consequences of another person's unresolved legal history. The trip was booked, the wedding is his family's event, and none of this is his fault. He made plans in good faith. He raised the concern. He even told her ahead of time exactly what he intended to do. Why should he miss an important family milestone, a cousin's wedding he presumably cared about, because of a legal situation he had no hand in creating and no power to resolve? That argument is clean, logical, and on paper it makes a lot of sense. But then there is the other half. And their argument is not about legal obligation. It is about what it feels like to be her in that moment. Picture it from her side. You are standing at an airport with officers pulling you aside. There are people around you moving through their own morning routines, rolling their bags, sipping their coffee, completely indifferent to the fact that your day is falling completely apart in public. You are scared. You are probably humiliated in a way that is hard to describe. The hot, shrinking kind of humiliation that comes from having your private mistakes laid out in the most exposed setting imaginable. And you turn around to see your partner, the person you have been building something with, the person who knows about this situation, who has known about it for weeks, and he is grabbing his bag and walking toward the gate. Not staying. Not pausing. Not searching your face to see if you need him. Just gone. And yes, she created this situation. Yes, these are her warrants. But 6 months in, that moment would tell her everything she needs to know about who this man is when things get hard. The thing that really stands out in this story is how much he leans on the phrase, "We are not a married couple." And he is right, technically speaking. They are not married. There is no legal framework binding him to her crisis. But relationships are not legal contracts. You do not need a ring on your finger before your partner's basic humanity kicks in. 6 months is not forever, but it is also not nothing. It is enough time to have built something real, enough time to have shared your fears and your embarrassing stories and your 2 a.m. thoughts, enough time to have become someone who matters to another person. And it is enough time for a moment like this to define exactly what that something is built on. Here is what I keep coming back to. He knew. He knew about the warrants before they left for the airport that morning. He knew there was a real, concrete, non-negligible possibility that this exact scenario could play out. He had known for a month. And in all that time, he still did not make any kind of contingency plan together with her, did not sit down and say, "Okay, what happens if this goes badly? What do you need from me? Who do we call? How do we handle this as a team?" He just answered her question with a clean and final yes, "I am boarding without you," and that was that. There was no, "Let me think about that." There was no, "What would you need from me in that moment?" There was just a clear, direct, "This is your problem, good luck," delivered with the calm of someone who had already made his peace with it. And that is where the emotional math starts to get complicated. Because being right is not the same as being kind. And being legally unobligated is not the same as being a good partner. He answered her question with the logic of a stranger, not the instincts of someone who cares about her. And she was asking him that question not because she needed a legal opinion. She was asking because she wanted to know if he would show up for her when it mattered. She was taking the temperature of the relationship in the most direct way she knew how. And he told her clearly, calmly, and without hesitation that he would not. Let me be honest about something here. Some people in this situation genuinely believe they are doing the right thing by refusing to enable irresponsibility. And there is a version of that argument that holds up. If he had cancelled the trip, rushed to her side, and absorbed the fallout of her situation, he might have been sending her a message that there are no real consequences to letting things like this spiral. That someone else will always be there to soften the landing. That her choices, however messy, will always be someone else's emergency to manage. She might never take full ownership of the consequences of her own choices. Tough love is real. It exists for a reason. Letting people face the results of their actions is sometimes the most caring thing you can do, not because it feels good, but because it forces a reckoning that might not come any other way. That is a valid framework for relationships and for life in general, and anyone who dismisses it entirely is probably not being fully honest about how enabling behavior works. But here is the difference. Tough love and emotional abandonment are not the same thing, and collapsing them into each other is the oldest trick in the book for people who want the moral credit of the first without the discomfort of examining the second. You can say, I am still going to the wedding, and also say, I am going to make sure you have someone with you, I am going to call you the second I land, I am going to stay on the phone with you until we figure out what happens next, I am going to help you find a lawyer when I get back. You can hold both things at once. The wedding can still happen and you can still be a person who shows up emotionally for someone in crisis. You can go to the wedding and still be a person who cares. What you cannot do, if you want to call yourself a loving partner, is reduce another human being in a moment of crisis to a logistical inconvenience and nothing more. Because the moment you do that, you are not practicing tough love. You are just leaving. The part that nobody is really talking about is what this moment reveals about the foundation of this relationship. 6 months in, they are already taking trips together and attending family weddings. That is a meaningful level of involvement. That is not a casual situationship. That is two people who have decided, consciously or not, that they are building towards something. But apparently the emotional depth does not match the practical depth. They are doing the things that committed couples do, showing up at each other's family events, booking travel, making plans months in advance. But when the moment of truth arrived, his instinct was not to be her partner. It was to be her. Brother-in-law told a recovering new mom he feels sorry for her baby, so I blocked him forever. He called her. She was a few days out of surgery, still healing, barely sleeping, trying to figure out how to keep a newborn alive while managing postpartum anxiety. And her own brother called her on the phone and said, I feel sorry for your baby. That is where this story begins. Not with a family disagreement. Not with a misunderstanding. With a grown man looking at his sister in one of the most vulnerable moments of her entire life and deciding that was the right time to be cruel. Let us set the scene properly, because context matters a lot in this one. Our guy and his wife just had their first baby. The birth did not go smoothly. It ended in a cesarean section, which is major abdominal surgery. Not a minor procedure, not something you bounce back from in a few days. We are talking about an incision through multiple layers of muscle and tissue, a recovery that involves pain with every movement, every cough, every attempt to stand up from a chair. His wife is dealing with all of that physical reality, and on top of that, she is navigating postpartum anxiety, which anyone who has experienced it or watched someone go through it knows is not just normal new parent nerves. It is a real and serious condition that can make the early weeks of parenthood genuinely overwhelming. It is the kind of thing that wakes you up at 3 a.m. with your heart pounding over nothing you can name. It is the kind of thing that makes a quiet house feel loud with worry. Given all of that, they made a very reasonable decision. They wanted a few weeks to themselves. They did not want a constant parade of visitors coming through the door, filling the space with noise and expectation and the social pressure of performing okayness when you are very much not okay. They wanted to breathe, to figure out feeding and sleeping and all the thousand tiny panicked calculations that come with a brand new human being in your home. They are also both introverted by nature, which means the social energy they would normally have was already running low even before the baby arrived. Wanting space in those early weeks is not antisocial. It is survival. Now enter the brother-in-law. And here is where the story gets interesting, because there is clearly some backstory working underneath the surface here. He and his wife had a baby the previous year. He has apparently been harboring feelings for a while about not being close enough to his sister's family. He feels like they do not make enough effort. He feels like when he visits, they are not enthusiastic enough about his presence. He has been sitting on this resentment for some time, nursing it quietly, letting it grow heavier and sharper with every visit that did not go the way he imagined it would in his head. And he chose to unload all of it on his sister when she was 3 days out of major surgery. He did not choose a quiet afternoon when things had settled. He did not wait a month, or even a week. He picked the moment when she had the least capacity to absorb any of it. Oh buddy. Of all the moments to pick. Of all the times you could have said something. So what did he actually say? He told her he feels sorry for her baby. He asked why she even had a baby if she was going to be like this. And he said he hopes the baby does not turn out like his parents. Sit with those words for a second, because they deserve more than a quick read. Those are not words that slip out in frustration. Those are targeted sentences. Each one was chosen because it would cut deep. He thought about what would land hardest and he said it anyway. He said it slowly enough to mean it. And he said all of it to a woman who is still healing from surgery, who is anxious, who is exhausted down to her bones, and who called him probably thinking they were going to have an actual conversation, maybe even some reassurance, maybe just the sound of a familiar voice. Instead she got that. Our narrator, the husband, found out what happened and did exactly what most people would consider the minimum acceptable response. He texted the brother-in-law. He laid out clearly that a line had been crossed, that an apology was owed, and he gave context, explaining the surgery, the exhaustion, the anxiety, the simple need for a few weeks of quiet before opening the door to everyone. He did not explode. He did not threaten. He explained himself like someone who was genuinely trying to give the other person a way to understand the situation and do the right thing. He explained himself and asked for accountability. That is a mature response to a genuinely infuriating situation. Most people would not have been that measured. The brother-in-law's reply is what tips this from a family disagreement into something that really needs to be examined. He doubled down. He said he stands by every word. He said he only feels sorry for the baby because the family is too isolated. He compared his sister's difficult birth and recovery to every other woman who has had a rough delivery and managed to be, in his words, present for their family. He held up these unnamed women as evidence that his sister was failing, as if a cesarean section and postpartum anxiety are simply not good enough reasons to need some time alone. And then he threw in the final blow. He said he has had more sleepless nights than this guy has and does not use it as an excuse to be selfish. That is not someone who made a mistake and is struggling to admit it. That is someone who genuinely believes he was right. And that makes it so much worse, because you can work with regret, but you cannot reason with certainty. That last line. He compared his sleepless nights to theirs as if this is a competition. As if love and family loyalty are rationed out based on who suffered most. As if a man whose wife is recovering from surgery and battling postpartum anxiety needs to be reminded that other people are tired too. The audacity of sitting down to type that out, reading it back, and deciding yes, this is what I want to send. That is not family. That is someone keeping score. So the husband blocked him. From everything. And now there is tension in the marriage because it is her brother, and she is starting to wonder if she should have kept what he said to herself to avoid the fallout. And that part breaks my heart a little, because it means she is partially blaming herself for the consequences of his behavior. Picture her in those first fragile postpartum days, already stretched thin, already second-guessing herself about everything, and now adding this to the pile. She told her husband what her brother said, which is exactly what you are supposed to do in a marriage, and now she feels like that honesty made things worse. That is not fair to her. Here is the thing about the brother-in-law's argument that falls apart the moment you look at it directly. He is saying they are too isolated, too antisocial, too closed off. But his evidence for this is that in the weeks immediately following a difficult birth, they did not throw open their doors and welcome everyone in. That is not isolation. That is recovery. That is the most basic version of taking care of yourselves and your newborn. The idea that a family is dysfunctional because they needed a few weeks to breathe after major surgery is not a serious argument. It is just someone dressing up their own impatience in the language of concern. And the visits themselves. They are living with her parents. He and his wife come over to see her parents, not because specific plans were made, and then they get upset that this couple does not drop everything and perform enthusiasm for their unannounced arrival. You cannot show up somewhere without warning and then feel personally wounded that you were not treated like a guest of honor. That is not how any of this works. The fact that this resentment had been building before the baby even arrived tells you that the brother-in-law has a pattern of expecting things from this couple that they never agreed to provide. I want to talk about what he actually said for a moment, because I think it is easy to gloss over it when the conversation moves into territory about whether blocking was the right call or whether this will permanently damage the family dynamic. He told his sister, who just had a baby, that he feels sorry for her child. That is a statement designed to wound. It is not criticism. It is not concern. It is a calculated thing to say to someone who is already anxious about whether she is doing enough as a new mother. Postpartum anxiety often centers exactly on that fear, the fear that you are not good enough, that something is wrong with you, that your child will suffer because of your shortcomings. And he aimed directly at that fear. He found the softest and most unprotected part of her, and he pushed. Whether he knew that or not, that is what he did. Now let us talk about the verdict, because this one is not complicated even though the emotional fallout is messy. The husband is not the bad guy here. Blocking someone who refuses to apologize for saying those things to his recovering wife is not an overreaction. It is a reasonable consequence from a man who is trying to protect his family. He asked for an apology in calm and measured language. He gave context. He gave a path forward. The brother-in-law rejected all of it and doubled down. At that point, continuing to engage is not the high road. It is just absorbing punishment for no reason. The wife saying she wishes she had never told him is a completely understandable reaction, but it is also a sign of how twisted this has gotten. She should not have to carry the secret of her brother's cruelty to protect the family peace. That is an impossible and unfair position. The rift was not created by her telling her husband. The rift was created the moment her brother decided to say those things to her. That is where this started. Everything else is just the fallout. And here is the final word on this, because it needs to be said clearly. You do not get to attack a new mother days after surgery, tell her you feel sorry for her child, double down when confronted, and then act confused about why there is distance. The brother-in-law wants all the warmth and closeness of a tight-knit family without doing any of the actual work that closeness requires. Closeness requires patience. It requires showing up with grace when the timing is not ideal. It requires understanding that life sometimes puts people in survival mode for a few weeks and that is not a betrayal of you personally. He had none of that. He had only entitlement and resentment, and he handed it to his sister at the worst possible moment. This family deserves the quiet they asked for. They deserve to figure out parenthood without someone in the background keeping score and deciding their recovery is not legitimate enough. The husband did the right thing. The only question now is whether the brother-in-law will ever actually reckon with what he said, or whether he will spend the next several years telling anyone who will listen that he was the one who was wronged here. Drop a comment below letting me know which story hit harder for you, and if you want more of these, a like and subscribe means everything to this channel.